Salve omnes, and welcome back. In this video, we are going to be going through the final two chapters of Caesar Book 6, following the AP Latin syllabus, chapters 19 and 20. Very quickly before we begin, as always, let's talk about our color coding. We see words in red, those are going to be our subjects. We see words in green, those are our verbs. And anything showing up in blue is a direct object of some kind. Likewise, words that show up in boldface type are the main clause or thought of the sentence, and words showing up in not boldface type are subordinate in some way. All right, so with that out of the way, let's do this. Here in Book 19, Caesar is starting off. Now we are talking about domestic life, for lack of a better phrase. We're talking about relations between husbands, viri, and wives, uxores. And it's because we're talking about uxores that we know that viri here is not just men, but actually husbands. So let's talk about husbands. And we can see here that Caesar is setting up a comparison here because we have the correlatives, quantas and tantas, both of which are going to be talking about pecunias. So we're talking about money. So husbands, however much money from their wives in the name of a dowry. Now this dotis right here is genitive, going with nomine. So we would say something like under the title of dowry, or under the heading, or the by name of dowry, they receive. So a dowry, remember, is sometimes called a bride price. It's the money that would come from the bride's family, travel with the woman into her new family with her husband. However much money husbands receive from their wives in the name of their dowry, let's scroll down and see what happens. That same amount, or as much money, let's save this ablative absolute here for 1 second, they must offer up the same amount, communicant, they must equal it. All right, they must provide as much money with the dowry. So the idea here is that the husbands in a marriage, husbands need to bring as much money to the relationship as the wives do with their dowry. Once an estimation, right, an estimate, has been made from their possessions, from their goods. So the idea here is that in a marriage, a man is supposed to bring, once we get a sense of how much he actually possesses, a man is supposed to offer up a similar amount of money. We say money, but again, a dowry could be more than money. It could be livestock, it could be land, it could be anything like that, which is why it's necessary to take an estimate of what the man possesses so that he can offer up something of relatively the same amount of value with the dowry. All right, continuing on talking about this money that has been brought to the marriage by both sides, the husband and the wife. The accounting, that's how we're going to translate ratio here. The accounting, and then we jump to the genitive that is going with ratio. The accounting of all this money is held conjunctim. Conjunctim is an adverb meaning together. All right, so the idea is that the money is basically put in a joint account, we might say today, right, using a more modern banking term. The money, or the accounting of all of this money, is held collectively or together, and the fructus, nominative plural, subject of servantur, the profits, literally the fruit, but we're talking about profits here, the profits are saved. And, just like in the last several chapters in the previous video, Caesar uses a great deal of asyndeton here when he's just sort of listing things. So we're going to be providing some ands where none are written. It's totally fine. Whichever, that's the uter here asking the question, whichever of them, that would be the husband or wife, whichever of them literally surpasses in life, vita here is ablative, whichever of them lives longer, right, surpasses in respect to life, to that person. Now the eum here is masculine, but it could refer to either the husband or the wife, whichever one lives longer than the other. The part of both Utrius, we see the utrius, that's a genitive, because uter is one of those unus nauta words. We've seen a couple of those before that have irregular forming genitives and datives in the singular. So the part of both with the prophets of, we might say from, but it's a genitive, superiorum temporum, of the previous, literally time, but we could say years or something like that, of the time that past years, it comes to that person. A husband and wife bring equal amounts of money to a marriage, and that money is held, or the accounting of all of that money is held collectively. The profits of that money, whatever that wealth produces, is saved. The profits are saved. And whichever one of the couple lives longer than the other, to that person, the account of all that wealth, along with all of the profits that have accrued over the years, it goes to the survivor. All right, talking more about the relation of husbands to their wives. Husbands, in this case with in uxores, just as with in liberos, we might say in respect to their wives, or we might even say over their wives. All right, because that makes sense with the idea that we get down here. Husbands over their wives, just like over their kids, have the power of life and death. Husbands have the power or the right of life and death over their wives, just as over their kids. And cum, quick check of the verb, decessit, that's indicative, so we know cum means when. When, now, here's something that's kind of interesting. Pater familiae. This is a nominative, masculine, singular word in Latin. The reason it looks like this is because the word itself, pater familiae, is so old that this is an archaic form of the nominative singular. But it is a nominative singular. It is not genitive. It is not feminine. All right? And it refers to literally the most common, one of the most common translations you'll see of pater familias would be something like the head of the household. Okay, so when the head of the household, who was born in a rather high-ranking place, so again, we're talking about status in society, we're talking about a rather important man, when this pater familias dies, his relatives, propinqui literally means the closest ones to him, so his relatives, not his neighbors, his relatives get together. Let's scroll down, and there's quite a lot that goes on here. Let's see if we can fit it all in. Nope, not quite. We'll get there. And de morte si res in suspicionem venit. De morte goes with this C clause. If the situation concerning his death comes into suspicion, then quaestionem habent. So we might just say they interrogate, but they have a questioning is literally how it works, right? So they interrogate the wives. They have a questioning of the wives, de uxoribus. They have a questioning of the wives in servilem modum. Now, this could mean a couple different things, depending on how you understand this. It is possible that this is simply referring to the very standard Roman practice. When someone of importance dies in Roman society, all of the slaves are gathered and questioned about, did you have anything to do with this? So it might just mean that this is a standard part of Gallic society, the way that questioning the slaves of a wealthy or important man after his death is a standard part of Roman society. But it could also mean, here's the other way that you might understand servilem modum, that in Roman society, the testimony of slaves was not accepted unless the slaves were put through torture first. It was not believed that a slave would give accurate accounting of things unless he was tortured. So it might be that if there is some suspicion about the death of a terribly important man, the wives of that man might be questioned with torture, okay, about the circumstances of the important man's death. So it's not entirely clear how you read it. Literally, it just means in the manner of a slave. So you can just leave it at that. You don't need to read anything into it necessarily for translation purposes, in the manner of a slave. And If something is found, we notice that the compertum is neuter, so that's how we know something. If anything is discovered, they kill the wives. We know that it's the wives because of the gender of this participle, excruciatas. The they, by the way, is the propinqui, the relatives. They kill the wives who have been, we might say in English, because we need to get to this participle, this perfect passive participle, who have been tortured by fire and we would say all other sorts of tortures, right? All other sorts of torments. Okay, leaving that aside, now since we've mentioned the death of a terribly important man, and also possibly one or more of his wives, let's talk about funerals. Funerals, according to the culture of the Gauls, this pro here, since we're not comparing or replacing anything, it simply means something like according to. According to the culture of the Gauls, funerals are magnificent and sumptuous. We can just use the cognates. Why not? What else do they do? They bring, we can go down here and see inferunt, they bring everything which they think. Now, this phrase right here, this phrase, vivis cordi fuisse, means something to the effect of was dear to them while they were living. The way this breaks down is these words, vivis and cordi, are both datives. Cordi with esse, right, because we know fuisse is from sum esse. Cordi with esse is a standard Latin idiom to express the idea of to be dear to or to be important to. So if something is important to you, est cordi, it is to your heart. Okay, that's how that works. Technically, cordi is just a predicate dative. See, it shows up with esse, which is why this is kind of a double dative, but not strictly speaking a double dative. This, vivis, is the dative of interest, but cordi isn't really a dative of reference because of the idiomatic structure of this phrase. So something was to the heart for the people who were alive. So anything that they thought, or they think, was dear to these men while they were living, they bring it to the fire, because the Gauls clearly practice cremation. They bring it to the fire. Etiam animalia, even their animals. Okay, so they would even sacrifice your favorite horse or dog or something like that so that you could take it with you to the afterlife. And, now here's where things get very interesting. Paulo supranc memoriam. This is a phrase. Paulo here is an ablative of degree of difference. We've seen these before. In this case, it's not with a comparative like we've seen it in previous times. In this case, it's with this prepositional phrase. Literally, this means above this memory. But what that means idiomatically is beyond the memory of people now living. All right, so not just a little bit beyond the memory of people now living. So not too long ago is basically what this entire phrase, Paulo supranc memoriam, means. Not that long ago, a little bit before the memory of people living today, slaves and clients, whom it was believed, this is an impersonal, it is imperfect, but it's an impersonal verb, whom it was believed were loved by the people who are now dead, right? By them in life. So favorite slaves and favorite clients of the person who is now dead, whom it is believed were loved by them, we get a little ablative absolute here, once the proper funeral rites are finished, they would be cremated una. This is the adverb una, not anything else. They would be cremated as well, or together with them, with the dead person. So these days, they only bring the things to the fire that you particularly liked when you were alive, and they'll bring your favorite animals to the fire too, to be sacrificed with you as you journey to the next life. But not too long ago, they would even offer up slaves and clients that were your favorites to be cremated with you, to go to the afterlife with you. Okay, well, with that out of the way, Caesar now shifts to talking about politics a little bit. All right, and we see that right here with suam rem publicam. those tribes, we might say, for quae civitates, those tribes are considered, notice the passive verb here, and we're not going into indirect speech, all right? We're just going to this kind of complementary infinitive. They are thought to administer their state or their political affairs. Remember, res publica in Latin is used generically to refer to the state or the political entity or matters of politics, etc., etc., etc. So here we can just say like their state. They are considered to administer their state very well, or rather well, and they have it established, literally sanctified, but we could just say established in law or by law. All right, so those states that are thought to conduct their political affairs very well, those states have it established in law. What do they have established in law? Si quis quid. Now, we know that after si nisi numen ne, ali takes a holiday. But in this case, when we see this particular structure, this quis quid structure, after si, both quis and quid are going to get ali tacked back onto them. Si ali quis ali quid is how that works out. If anyone receives, or, finds or something like that, hears actually is going to make good sense for us here. If anyone accepts anything or hears anything concerning Republica, so again, tricky to translate, concerning politics or the political situation or the state from their neighbors, either by means of rumor or by means of rumor. So we're kind of stuck here. This is almost a hendiades, because rumor is rumor, and fama also means rumor. So report or rumor, whispers and rumor, something like that. Just pick one to translate as rumor, and the other one has to be something else. So rumor and report, what does that person have to do? So this uti actually goes back to this phrase up here, habent legibus sanctum. They have it established by law that. All right, so the C is just getting us here. This C exists separately. So once we pick up with this idea, they have it set down in law that, if anyone hears anything about the state from their neighbors, right, whether by rumor or by report, what must happen? That person, now the quis here, the aliquis is still the subject of deferat and communicet and all the rest, these two, because it was the subject along the way, and it's singular. That person needs to bring it to the magistrates, to the elected officials, and not, so the way here is like que. Traditionally, way is translated or, and que is translated and, but we can translate it as and here. It's perfectly fine. So we have a positive command and a negative command, because with the idea of they have it laid down in law, that makes these kind of commands, because it's established by law. They have it set down in law that you have to bring what you have heard to the officials, and you are not to speak of it with anyone else. Yes, this quo kind of also takes ali, all right, because there's a ne and but it also is, it's kind of ali quo, all right? You are not to speak of it with anyone else. Why is this the law? Why is this the custom among states? Again, remember what Caesar said it up at the top, among tribes that generally are thought to manage their public affairs well, commodious. Well, because it is thought, cognitum, and again, we see that's how we know it's it, because it's neuter, so it's impersonal. It is thought, or it is believed, and then everything that follows, unsurprisingly, is indirect speech. So what is believed by the Gauls? Often, men, what kind of men? Rash men, people who are prone to quick action, and imperitos men. This is inexperienced men. What will happen to these men? Well, they might be terrified by false rumors. They might be driven to crime, and they might seize a plan. There's the little typo here. This concilium should be blue as the direct object of capere. mea culpa. They should seize a plan. They might seize a plan concerning the greatest matters. So, in other words, they might get ideas into their head that they, should be doing things that they shouldn't. That's why if anyone hears anything concerning public affairs from neighbors, whether by rumor or report, etc., they bring it to the magistrates and they don't talk about it, because people who are prone to quick action, they don't think things through, or they're just inexperienced, they don't know what's going on. Well, they might be terrified by by fake news. They might be compelled to crime, or they might start making plans about very, very important matters. And we can't have that. And sure enough, what do the elected officials do? Well, they do a bunch of things. The magistrates will conceal things which seem, and this is something that often happens with the idea of video in the passive, to seem. We have to understand best or good, and we have seen this before. This use of videtur, just understood or implied to mean to be best. So the magistrates, the elected officials, will conceal things which seem best to conceal, is what we have to fill in the rest with, and the things which they, the magistratus, because this is a plural subject, obviously, with these plural verbs, the things which they judge to be of use. Here's, again, essay with usu, just used differently here, in this case in the prepositional phrase. The things which they judge to be of use, they will share, we would say with the crowd, but Latin, of course, has to use the dative, indirect object. They will proffer up to the crowd. They will share to the multitude. So the elected officials decide what gets reported on and what gets concealed. And then final statement, de Republica, concerning public affairs. Again, translating Republica is tricky. Unless it is through, we might say through proper channels, or through a formal meeting or something like that. Concilium can have a lot of different meanings. But the idea is something like, unless it's being handled by the elected officials in a council concerning matters of state, it is not permitted to speak. So you are not permitted to talk about public affairs or about politics, maybe, right, about the political situation, unless it's in, through the proper channels. Okay, unless it's in a council. So, and that brings us to the end of Caesar's discussion of the customs of the Gauls in Book 6, which is also the end, if you've gone from books 1 sequentially through 4, 5, and 6, this also brings us to the end of the AP syllabus readings in Latin from Caesar's De Bello Gallico. Maximus gratias for sticking through, if you started with book 1, all the way to the end. And if we haven't started Virgil yet, we're headed there now. Maximus gratias iterum et valete.